I'm Matt Easton, a historical fencing instructor and antique sword dealer, and today we're looking at the movie fight review of Alatriste from 2006. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and appropriately I'm holding an original 17th century Spanish rapier. We're going to be looking at one fight, there are many, but one fight from the movie Alatriste from 2006, starring the fantastic Viggo Mortensen. This is one of the movies I've been asked more than any other to review, but if there's a movie fight, a particular fight, or just a general movie you'd like me to review, get posting in the comments down below. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this fight. He looks so cool, and I absolutely love the music as well, very appropriate.
Date preso, Diego.
Just a weird little comment on his hat. Actually, this type of hat is extremely useful, particularly in fighting with rapiers, because it will actually offer a fair amount of protection from downwards cuts. Now, obviously you think a sword cut, a floppy old hat, but actually, you know, these are rapiers, so they're not the most powerful cutting swords in the world. They can cut, they are cut with, but a big old floppy brim like this might protect your face from a cut which otherwise might cause you to bleed, might go into your eyes, this kind of stuff. So actually a big floppy hat, we know, very popular at the time, and I won't say this is the case here because I think it's not, but sometimes there was a type of like secret, it's called a hidden secret helmet or kind of skull cap made of iron or steel worn underneath the hat. And if I was going around in 17th century Spain getting into fights, I think I'd probably wear one of these. They were quite popular in the English Civil War. So just essentially a little steel skull cap you could wear underneath your hat, which would protect you from a cut. Another little detail there is, of course, the cape, the cloak, a very popular item of clothing to protect you from nasty wet weather. But more importantly, for this particular situation, it can be used wrapped around the left arm, used with a rapier. It can also be used to entrap an opposing sword, wrap around. It's not used like that here, but nevertheless it can be, and so carrying a cloak around is a useful extra backup weapon used to wrap around your arm, parry cuts, or indeed to snare thrusts, wrap around the opponent's weapon, so on and so forth. Very artistic tossing away of the hat there. Personally, I think I probably would have kept the hat on. So super little detail here, but for anybody who's a fencer or a duelist, self-defense person, always note whether your opponents are right or left-handed. It's incredibly important. Fencing against a left-hander is very different to fencing from a right-hander. It dictates what guard positions you go into, which side of you is most vulnerable, which side of them is most vulnerable. Incredibly important. So look at the side that they're wearing their sword on, which won't always 100% correspond to whether they're left or right-handed, but usually. And also, obviously, once they draw the sword, which hand have they got the sword in. Now, anybody who's watched The Princess Bride will know this could be a trick, so watch out for that as well. They might be ambidextrous also, but nevertheless, primarily just make note of which hand they've got their sword in.
Desármalo. Date preso o te mato.
So little note there, you notice that his opponent actually has what we call a cup hilt rapier with a completely all-round bowl. Actually, Alatriste has a rapier like this, which has shells, sometimes known as a conch type shell guard, linked with little bars at the side here. Very similar end result, but anyway, just so you're aware that I happen to, by coincidence, be holding a rapier which is extremely similar to Alatriste, and this is an original antique one.
¿A quién le conseguirá tu viuda ahora la vara de alguacil? ¿Eh? Ah. Cornudo, cabrón.
So believe it or not, you know, that is a fencing tactic. It's a strategy to try and enrage your opponent and provoke them to attack. And you know, when you come to fence someone, you're always thinking, are they going to move first? Am I going to provoke an attack? sometimes letting the opponent attack first is actually really useful because you can play off that, and in this case provoking them to attack in an uncontrolled and foolhardy manner is definitely actually to Alatriste's advantage. So that is actually good fencing technique, calling him a cuckold. So immediately to mention there, it's interesting that the first attacker comes in with what looks like a thrust and he just parries it aside, sends him off. The second attacker comes in with a great big downwards cut. Now, you might think, Matt, are you going to criticise this? Yes and no. So firstly, it is a stupid thing to do as an opening attack. Or is it? Actually, these rapiers can cut, and if you cut someone in the head, yeah, it's not going to split their head with this kind of rapier. But nevertheless, it's going to wound a person, it might daze them and allow you a follow-up thrust. Moreover, historically, with the context hat on, actually we know that people did this. So whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, I'm actually not going to criticise. From a movie maker's point of view, this is actually realistic because a lot of people, despite the fact you've taught them, well, this is a rapier and the best thing to do is to thrust with it, actually under stress, under rage, under the heat of the moment, a lot of people will give a cut because it's the most natural thing to do. And we know from historical sources that even with rapiers, people did it. So historically, completely valid. Also, you know, I love the fact that he has used a headbutt, he's used a sort of strike with, it's difficult to tell whether it's with his arm or with the hilt, but all of these things are absolutely found in the fencing treatises of the day. So remember, it's not just about fencing with the blade, it's about fighting with all of your body. You can punch, you can kick, you can eye gouge, you can wrestle, and of course you can smack people with the hilt of your sword, especially the pummeling someone. That's where that expression comes from. So really, really common. So far I'm liking this. It's a proper fight. Good idea, kicking the weapon away. We do the same, of course, with a firearm or something like that. It's completely good sense. You may as well put the boot in because, you know, you don't know how this is going to pan out. You may as well injure the person further. And you know, the whole idea, I think a lot of people have the idea of just, you know, killing or whatever, but you have to remember there's two main factors involved here. Number one is the law. If you just kill someone, especially if there are multiple witnesses on their side but no witnesses on your side, then you could be accused of murder. And you know, the punishment for murder at this time could be the death sentence, it could be a very long time in prison, it could be being exiled, all sorts of other things. So clearly you don't want to murder someone if you don't have to, just purely from a self-interest point of view or a financial point of view. But religion, okay, these people in this are fundamentally all God-fearing, and the book teaches you not to kill if you don't need to. Yeah, sure, if you're going on crusade. Yeah, sure, if it's in self-defense and you've got no choice. You know, there are various reasons why you might, in the eyes of God, justifiably kill someone. But if you don't need to kill someone, then it's definitely favourable from a religious Catholic point of view to not kill someone. So I think this is very well handled.
Ay, Martín.
Quanto me place veros pelear, capitán.
Oh dear, okay, this wasn't what he wanted, and it's interesting to see that the new opponent here does have a full cup hilt rapier. It's contemporary, it's just a slightly different design. They're both right-handed. I immediately note he pulls it out with his right hand. We haven't seen any left-handers in this fight scene. That's good. Left-handers, generally speaking in fencing, have an advantage, especially in the historical period actually, which I'll come to in a second, but because left-handers are used to fighting right-handers, right-handers are not that used to fencing left-handers. So fencing left-handed is an advantage statistically due to exposure. Moreover, in this period, probably left-handers were less common than they are now because it was religiously and societally kind of squashed a bit. So if you were naturally left-handed, you were encouraged in many cases to be right-handed. That being said, there were left-handed fencers at this time, and they are mentioned in the fencing treatises, and there's advice on how to techniques to prefer if you are left-handed, and indeed techniques against left-handed people, going all the way back into the 15th and 16th centuries, and certainly by the 17th as well.
Tiempos inveros. Os he echado de menos.
So interesting little note here, they are both holding their swords extended, which is something that we find in Spanish styles of fencing, in La Verdera Destreza, where the sword is held quite high and extended. In Spanish styles, the hand is usually, and in English as well, and French, the hand is usually kept lower at a slant angle like that. In Spanish systems, they seem to have preferred holding that hand up high. This is even shown in Domenico Angelo's treatise of 1763 against smallsword. So it was a characteristically Spanish thing. In fact, George Silver even talks about it in his Paradoxes of Defence in 1599. So it was characteristically Spanish. So they're holding the swords up high, very Spanish thing to do. You'll notice that Alatriste's opponent pulls a dagger out. Now, generally speaking, a rapier and dagger has a big advantage over a single rapier. Not maybe as massive as some people might assume. I do fence single rapier against rapier and dagger sometimes, and vice versa. Personally, if you're particularly good at single sword, you can balance out the disparity, the difference between those two. But generally speaking, in balance, most people who are in the same ballpark of ability and skill and experience, generally speaking, the rapier and dagger has an advantage over the rapier alone.
Sí, y a la puta que os parió.
So I didn't like some of the opening moves there. They were a bit against the blade, but as my buddy over at Sellsword Arts pointed out in a recent video of his, absolutely beats on the blade are a thing, and they can create openings and cause the opponent to react in certain ways that you might be looking for. So don't always see, oh, he's attacking the blade, he's not attacking the person. Well, quite frankly, we do attack the blade a lot to achieve a secondary goal. So a beat on the blade to gain the center line, or a beat on the blade to make a person overreact in that direction to oppose, and then you loop around and hit them on the other side. So absolutely the beats are fine. And then we see some good deep thrusts coming in at Alatriste's body, and Alatriste is backed up against a wall. Never a good place to be. You always want to be able to move backwards or around or away if you can. So backing yourself into a corner or against a wall is, generally speaking, not a good thing. And now we see the cloak being used. Right, okay, right, we're going to stop there for a second. So, I'm not really sure why they came so close. I mean, obviously for choreography reasons and for dramatic reasons, I understand why. But in fencing terms, it wasn't clear for me to see why they came so close to a grapple. But I do like the fact that they are representing grapples. And as I said, sword fighting, real sword fighting, where corps à corps, body to body, is allowed, it happens a lot, and especially with rapiers, with long weapons, because if the point gets knocked aside, you can come in close, and at that point, really, if you don't have a dagger in your left hand, you're wrestling at that point. So I like that they're doing that. I like that he used the cloak to buy some space and create space. I think he could have used the cloak more. He could have used the cloak to envelope the person's sword, or flap in, throw it more in his face, throw it over him. In fact, this is something that's done. They could have done some more interesting things with the cloak, so I'm a bit disappointed by that it just got thrown away. I don't think Alatriste has pulled out his dagger yet, so it would have been nice to see him make more use of a second-hand weapon, i.e. the cloak, before throwing it away. There we go. So now Alatriste has got his dagger out, and honestly that would have been the sensible thing for him to do from the very start. As soon as he saw his opponent had a rapier and a dagger, he should have really just got the dagger out straight away. Okay, there was a little bit there where I didn't like that Alatriste was holding his dagger behind himself. That being said, this is actually found in some of the treatises. So sometimes if the dagger does a thing against the opponent's blade, it does momentarily come behind. And you might, again, I did just criticise that. You might criticise a person putting their dagger behind, but what it does is it brings this shoulder back, and by bringing the left shoulder back, it enables you to get greater reach with the right shoulder, in other words, the sword. So sometimes there are specific techniques, usually you'll keep both things in front of you, but there are specific techniques sometimes where you'll bring the left dagger hand back in order to get the right arm reached further forward, and of course it makes you a more narrow target as well. Right, I love the fact that they've got their weapons locked high, get rammed up against a wall. Really, at this point in a real fight, it's a question of who can detach one of their weapons, a sword or a dagger, quick enough to keep the cover with one and shank the person with the other. And it's really down to speed at this point. So it's interesting, that was actually a really nicely choreographed little exchange. A bit disappointing that from this grapple they pushed away, but I understand they want the fight to last for longer. In reality, you wouldn't be aiming to push someone away necessarily, you'd actually be aiming to probably keep your sword there, detach the dagger and shank them through the gut with the dagger, or in the neck or wherever. But breaking apart enables them to carry on the sword fight. And I really like the exchanges, and you notice Alatriste has his back to the wall again. Now, this is actually quite a useful training exercise, and if you want to improve your parry and ripostes, your parry reflexes, but also your ability to just keep parrying multiple attacks, if you train with your back to a wall and have your training partner attack you, and you just try and parry and riposte as well as you can without being able to run away and move away, it's actually a really useful bit of training. So it was really nice to see that in there. Right, okay, so they were back in a clinch again, then they broke away, which was, in fencing terms, a little bit odd. There was a bit of an exchange, and then Alatriste's opponent slashed him with the dagger. Now, as you might be able to guess, actually, a slash with a dagger is actually fairly unlikely to go through, with this type of narrow-bladed dagger, it's fairly unlikely to go through clothes. And honestly, if he just wanted to kill Alatriste, no question, he would have been far better off just stabbing. Okay, this type of dagger, although technically it can cut, is very narrow, it's quite back-weighted, it's got quite a large crossguard and pommel, so the point of balance is quite close to the hand. They're not really chopping weapons, and if you try and cut with even a kitchen knife through a jacket, it's actually really quite difficult. Thrusting, puncturing, no problem at all. Cutting, quite difficult. So, not so keen on that. So honestly, the way that Alatriste is acting here, he's acting more like he's been stabbed than cut. So we could just say, okay, from a writing point of view, this was actually a stab, but it looked more like a cut. So maybe the choreography, maybe they did it as a cut for safety reasons, or because it was easier to choreograph like that and pull the weapon through. Actually, in reality, I think that this was supposed to be representative of a stab. Yeah, and it's, you know, it's definitely looking like a stab wound in his gut here. Alatriste is in a bad way. He tries to take a swipe at his opponent, but his opponent just moves out of the way. So honestly, someone on the floor at this point is completely screwed. So obviously, if you watch things like MMA, a lot of people go to the ground and choose to go to ground. A lot of jiu-jitsu people love throwing themselves on their back like a cat with their feet and hands in the air. With weapons, with potentially multiple opponents, terrible idea. Never ever do this, okay? Apart from the fact that this is a stone floor, so it's going to be a lot more injuring to your body. But the fact is, with weapons, because you can reach someone with, even with a knife, but certainly with a sword, you can reach someone on the ground without going to ground. So you never want to deliberately be on the ground, okay? You never want to throw yourself on the ground when someone can just reach you with a weapon. Very bad idea, but clearly Alatriste doesn't have a choice here.
Sic transit, gloria mundi.
Yeah, so, you know, that was the kind of coup de grace, I suppose you could call it, but it was to a nondescript part of his body because, again, this is movie choreography, so it clearly wasn't into his body, it was in front of him. In reality, if you wanted to put someone out of their misery, then you probably wouldn't stab into their torso. You'd probably go for their neck or down somewhere arterial, basically. But yeah, fairly grim, and this is obviously not a nice end for Alatriste. Now, obviously, I'm sorry if you haven't seen the movie yet. I've just massively spoiled you, but I do recommend you watch the movie because it is really, really good. Right, I'm going to end it there because that's really the end of the fight. Overall, what did I think of it? I love it. It's a really cool movie. I think it probably could have done with better editing. I don't think it did particularly well in the cinema, and I think it could have done better. I think it's always problematic when it's a subtitled movie. But then again, overall, I loved the historical research of it. I love the costumes. I love the feeling. I'm not so sure about the blue hue, the filter that they put in everything, the historical blue filter. I would have liked to see a bit more colour. It was all a bit blue and brown and grey. Would have liked to have seen a few more bright colours because the 17th century is magnificent in terms of clothes and swords as well. But the fights, very well done because, in essence, this is what I love from cinema, is when a fight looks like a fight. And this looked like a fight. It wasn't the most historically accurate portrayal of rapier use at the time. A lot of the things that happened here weren't logical. They weren't necessarily the choreography that I would have chosen, that I would have done for this particular fight. I think they should have done a lot more with the cloak. I think they should have done more with the dagger. I think there's some more interesting techniques they could have fit in there and still had a long fight. But nevertheless, overall, I did like it. What would I give it out of 10? Probably about a 7. I didn't think it was amazing, but I thought it was pretty good, and I certainly didn't hate it. I did like it, and I'm going to watch it again now. Anyway, I hope that's been enjoyable for you to watch. This is one of my movie fight review series. If you haven't seen the others, go and check out that playlist. Please check that you're subscribed. Give me a like if you enjoyed this at all. And remember, I take suggestions down in the comments. So, any other movies you want me to look at, any other particular fights you want me to look at, then I'm very happy to do so. Just get posting in the comments down below and let me know, did you agree with my criticisms and praises of this particular fight? Do you like the movie Alatriste? I'm interested to hear your views. I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.